Hey guys, welcome back to Bryan's Mysteries and Adventures on Trail. And today's video is going to be a little bit different. We are going to be talking about the first documented tragedy on the Appalachian Trail. Well, the first documented murder on the Appalachian Trail. And this case involves two young people, a man by the name of Joel Eugene Polson, who was 26 years old at the time, and a woman by the name of Margaret Harritt, who was only 17 at the time. And this case begins down in South Carolina, more specifically just right around the corner from the University of South Carolina in this district called Columbia's 5 Points District. And it was basically sort of a trendy hippie type neighborhood that was, sort of up and coming. And Margaret she was attending the University of South Carolina, and she had just recently gotten a job at this Capri Italian restaurant. So she was there waiting tables, and she was just a very free spirit. She loved reading. She was very intelligent. She finished high school in 3 years. She was already in college, at 17. Very, very smart young woman. And she was waiting tables in this restaurant when one night in March of 1974, a young man by the name of Joel Eugene Polson, who was 26 years old at the time, had a ponytail, long hair, very upbeat guy, lots of energy. He came in and sat down and started up a conversation with her. And from the very beginning, Joel just started talking about the Appalachian Trail, how much he was just wanting to do it. He loved the outdoors. He loved the bicycle. Now, he had never been on the Appalachian Trail. He was a novice hiker, but he was just so excited about this trip, and he was trying to convince Margaret, whom he just met, to possibly go with him. And of course, this is over a 2,000-mile long trail, so for her, she was thinking wow, I'm not even someone who really exercises, so she just kind of laughed it off. But she entertained it. She talked to him that day, and then later on that evening they met at this place called the Joyful Alternative, which was another place in this area, just a place where that sold new age books and incense and stuff like that. And they just arbitrarily met there, and Joel got talking more about this planned trip to the Appalachian Trail. And although she wasn't interested in him in a romantic sense, she loved his energy, because she had that same type of energy, that will to just explore and discover new things and read about life. And so the more he talked about it, the more she started actually considering it. And before long, a plan started to formulate, and she was thinking about, she had already sort of was becoming disillusioned with her studies at the University of South Carolina. It wasn't that she didn't like studying, she just didn't like the particular classes, and she was looking for something else. And she thought, well, maybe this could be it. Now, of course, she wasn't sure how she was going to pass this off to her parents, because she was a teenager, and how is she going to tell her parents that she's going off with this older man? But she just told them that she was going to be going out on this hike with a group of 15 college students, and Joel was their leader. And now she did introduce him to their parents in April of 1974. And after that, it was just getting ready to start their Appalachian Trail through hike, which they officially started on May 9th of 1974. And they started at the southern terminus in Springer Mountain, Georgia, which is the normal place where people start. And in the very beginning, it was just rough because they weren't experienced hikers. So, of course, they had very heavy packs, and of course, they got blisters on their feet. But, then they were taking it slow. They were only going a few miles at a time before they had to stop. At one point, they ran into some forest workers who were clearing some logs using chainsaws on the trail, and they said hello, and then they continued on their way. And they only made it about 6 miles that first day, and they stopped at the Low Gap Shelter. And that's where they decided to spend the night. Near the Low Gap Shelter, there's, a little brook and some concrete pilings. And when they got there, they discovered that there was already another hiker there, which, on these trails is not uncommon. But back during the 70s, it's not like it is today. There wasn't hundreds and hundreds of people on the trail. I think in the years prior, in the early 70s, maybe 100 people attempted the trail a year. Now it's thousands. In any event, they saw this guy. He introduced himself as Ralph. They thought, okay, he seems normal, but they could tell he wasn't really, he was kind of down on his luck. He didn't really have much belongings. He didn't really have good gear. So Joel and Margaret headed down to the stream to clean up and talk, and Joel said that, this guy was wearing these suede crepe-soled boots, and he didn't have any gear for a long haul hike, so he was a little bit concerned. But they went back, they started a fire, they cooked dinner, they offered Ralph some. Ralph apparently turned away their food, and Ralph left the shelter and headed into the woods and actually brought more firewood and, helped with some of the chores. So they thought, okay, well, maybe he's just a little strange, but he seems like, he's helping. And what they decided was, between themselves, they said that they would get up really early in the morning and they would just head out that and fast. Well, that night, Margaret went to bed. Joel and I guess Ralph just sat there by the fire. They made this huge bonfire, but they didn't really talk. The next morning, Ralph left the shelter and Margaret was just getting her gear together. She was, starting to get ready, and she heard this loud noise, like a blast, like a shot or something. And she looked up and she saw that Joel had fallen over right near the fire ring. Ralph came walking back to the shelter and he was holding a gun. Well, he proceeded to then tie Margaret up. He ordered her to get down, and he just took her down this path that led further into the forest. He stopped her next to this tree, and he sat her down and he, tied her up, and she was, frantic. She was like, is this really happening? What's going on? And she said, could you please go see if Joel is all right? At least get him away from the fire pit so he doesn't get burned. Ralph kind of lied to her and said, oh yeah, he's not dead. He just hurt. He got hurt a little bit, but he's fine. So he said, yeah, I'll go back and make sure he's fine. He came back like 10 minutes later, and he removed her blindfold, untied her. They went back down to the shelter, and Joel was gone. And he just said, like, yeah, I took care of it. I got rid of him. Of course, Margaret is completely panicking now. She has no idea what's going on. She's just in shock. Well, at this point, Ralph orders her to eat and drink while he's there going through all of Joe's belonging. And then he asks her if Joel had any money. And she's like, well, we had traveler's checks. And so then he led her back into the woods, I guess sat her facing a tree, tied her up, like sort of hugging the tree, binding, just making so she couldn't get away. And then he covered up her pack and all her belongings with leaves. And he said to her, he's like, I'm going to leave a note at the shelter saying where you are. He left her water and Joe's helmet. Joe was wearing this pith helmet. He left her some food, and then he said, like, I'm going to leave this note so they'll be able to find you when they come. Well, he then balanced Joe's watch apparently on a log so that she could read, what time it was. Well, apparently 15 minutes later, Ralph totally changed his mind. He came back and said, I don't think people are going to be able to find you. I'm worried about that. So he said, basically, I'm giving you the choice. You can either stay here and wait it out, or you can hike out with me. And she was like, okay, well, I'm going to hike out with you. And that was obviously the smart thing to do, because this gave her a lot more options. So they got back on the Appalachian Trail, and he made Margaret go first. And he basically, obviously untied her and everything. He walked behind her, basically coercing her with his gun. And he told her, he did threaten her several times, saying that if she ever ran or she told anybody that they encountered, that he would just kill out anyone and everyone. Well, as they were hiking along, they ran into those same those guys, those workers that had been doing some chainsaw work. And she was wondering if they would notice that she was with a different man than Joel. However, they didn't, and Ralph ended up asking them where the nearest road crossing was. They said it was going to be a huge hike, so they just kind of continued on their way, and nothing really became of that. Margaret, being the extremely intelligent woman that she is, she led Ralph over a much more difficult part of the trail, a part with like lots of roots and rocks, and they were way above the Chattahoochee River. And Ralph had told her during this time on trail, that he had broke out of jail and he was feeling so out of his element that he wanted to get back west. And that's why he had stolen Joel's gear. I mean, this is how he's trying to justify it to her. And so at this point, they came up to another shelter. They rested there for a while. And then it was at this point where Ralph, I guess, found another map in Joel's pack, and he was actually shocked to find that the next road crossing was less than a few miles away. So then he told Margaret that they were changing their plan and that they were going to try and hitchhike to the nearest town, get a motel room, and then he would let her go the next morning. And of course, he kept up the threats of saying that, if you try and run, everyone's going to be in huge trouble. Well, they arrived at the road, and of course, within a few minutes of hitchhiking, a young woman pulled over and offered them a ride. And I can't even believe this part, but Ralph actually told them that they had these traveler's checks and that they had lost their IDs. And if this woman knew that there was a place, like if she knew of a place that would overlook that. And of course, this woman did. She's like, oh yeah, there's a place about 9 miles here. This Bavarian themed restaurant called Wurst House, maybe. And so at this point, they go to this restaurant, they cash some of their traveler's checks, and then they get a room at this local motel, the Chattahoochee Motel, which Ralph paid for with money that he had stolen from Joel. And then he actually signed the register as Mr. and Mrs. Joel Polson. So now he had stolen Joel's name too. They went next door, they bought some more food and supplies, and then they came back to the room, and apparently they watched some Elvis Presley movie on the TV while Ralph was practicing Joel's signature so that they could cash more of these checks. And he also told Margaret that if she wanted to keep a souvenir or momentum of Joel, she was welcome to go through his pack, and she just looked at him mortified and she left it be. So in any event, the next day they went back to this restaurant, the Wurst House. They cashed more of the traveler's checks, but apparently ran into some problems because the till didn't have enough money for the amount that they wanted to cash. So Ralph headed up to a nearby gas station up the street where he was able to cash $20 more of Joel's money. Then they decided that, Ralph, he once again changed the plans, and he said that they would find a bus station in Cleveland and then they would go their separate ways from there. So once again, they hitched a ride to Cleveland's Trailways station, where apparently Margaret asked a man at the counter for a ticket to Columbia via the city of Atlanta. And the ticket agent, pointed out to her that she could go to Cornelia, which is a town to the southeast, and had a Greyhound station that serviced cities much faster. So at that point, they hitched another ride to Cornelia, which I just can't imagine this whole time, all these rides, and just how scared she must have been and just how awful this was. She's definitely a very, very brave woman, and a very smart and intelligent woman, a strong-willed woman. When they reached Columbia, Margaret bought her ticket for $10, and then Ralph bought his ticket for $3 to Atlanta. Ralph's bus apparently was running late, but eventually it arrived and he got on, and she thankfully watched it pull away, and then she got on her own bus and was on her way on this Greyhound bus to Columbia. And apparently she tried to contact her brother when she got there, but she couldn't get in touch with him. So she contacted the Columbia police and told them the whole story. That call was then relayed to South Carolina to Sheriff Frank Baker, who knew this was going to be a crazy case, and he called the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. On Saturday, May 11th of 1974, Special Agent Stanley Thompson headed down to the Low Gap shelter to investigate this case, and he found Joel's remains that had been covered with a bunch of debris and various other things that were just absolutely tragic, the way they found his remains. And the autopsy found that he was killed by a .38 caliber bullet. Then on May 16th, the Atlanta Police Department received a telephone tip from an anonymous woman that said she recognized the man from the description in the newspaper, and she knew where he lived, his apartment, and she gave them that information. So Agent Thompson and Sheriff Baker subsequently drove to Atlanta, where police then obtained a search warrant. Of course, when they got there, he wasn't found, but they went through his apartment. They searched everywhere, and they found Joel's backpack, his clothes. They found the gun. They found Joel's camping gear. They just found a slew of various evidence. Then, of course, Thompson just waited outside of the apartment for Ralph to return, and he arrested him once he got there. They would later identify him as Ralph Howard Fox. He was 31 at the time, from Detroit, Michigan. And this guy had been involved in almost every type of horrible crime you can imagine, starting from the age of, 17, car theft. He was arrested again at 18, breaking and entering. I mean, all kinds of things. I can't even go into all of it here. But of course, if you guys want to, I'll have more information in the description where you can do further reading. But I mean, this guy was just a very, very violent criminal. He had actually been in Michigan State Prison, where he had actually escaped at one point. Then he was recaptured in October of 1969 and in Miami, and then he was returned to state prison. Then somehow, despite all these crimes, he was paroled, and he had started on the Appalachian Trail for the first time ever in his life, only 5 days before the terrible tragedy in May of 1974. Now, this case went to trial, and of course, Margaret picked Ralph out of the police lineup right away. Of course, Ralph admitted to owning the gun. He said that he had bought in Florida at some point later, and he said that he confessed to stealing Joel's gear and kidnapping Margaret, but he said that he had never had any intention of harming her, and he denied the actual killing of Joel. He was subsequently indicted for the murder the following October in 1975, which he then pleaded guilty to all the charges and was subsequently sentenced to life in Georgia State Prison. However, in July of 1991, Ralph was given a 1-month reprieve from his prison sentence to go to his brother's funeral in Michigan. And then, somehow, this guy was paroled again, and he moved to Lapeer County, Michigan, which is about 50 miles, I guess, north of Detroit. So now he's back to like his old stomping grounds. And after roughly 7 months of living there, he failed to appear once again in a parole officer meeting, and he didn't show up to his job or his home. Well, about a week later, on March 5th of 1992, police were called to a muddy area, a field in rural Lapeer County, where they discovered the remains of another person, a 29-year-old woman named Diane Good, who was from Detroit. They also found tons of evidence that there had been a car recently stuck in the mud there, and after checking with the various towing companies, they discovered that one of the drivers was none other than, you got it, Ralph Fox. Obviously, it didn't take them long to put it together that obviously this woman had broken down. She had got her car stuck in the mud. She called this towing agency. Ralph Fox showed up and subsequently killed her. So police issued a nationwide be on the lookout arrest warrant for this man, and he was subsequently tracked down in Skagit County, Washington, as he was actually there trying to break into a parked car. Well, he was caught, arrested right on the site, and he was sent back to Michigan, and he was tried for that murder under the circuit judge Martin E. Clements, and he was declared guilty by the jury for all charges. And then in 2003, he was transferred to a state hospital where he died from a month-long battle of lung cancer that finally brought this monster's reign of terror to an end. Personally, I have no idea how this man ever was eligible for parole twice. After looking at his file, all the violent crimes, prison escape, subsequently double murders, I mean, it's just insane that this man was ever let out of jail. That's just my opinion. But my thoughts and prayers go out to Joel Polson. He was just such an awesome young man. He had his whole life ahead of him, and he had such awesome dreams of adventuring and living life to the fullest. And he was taken from the world much too soon. I would love to be able to go to that area where he passed and put up a small memorial in his honor. I hope to be able to do that someday. That would be a really nice thing for him. My thoughts and prayers go out to Margaret Harritt too, and thankfully she survived her ordeal, but I'm sure she went through years of terrible nightmares and all kinds of turmoil, so I'm just hoping that she has had the strength and ability to move on. I want to thank everybody for watching as always, and please be respectful in the comments if you choose to leave them. Special thank you to co.ag for providing the background music, and I will see everybody in the next one. Take care. Hey everyone, thanks for sticking with me till the end, and this is the first video in a 3-part series. I'm going to be doing another video either tomorrow or the next day, and then another video for Halloween that's going to be a little bit different than my normal content. If you guys have any suggestions, of course, let me know. If there's anyone still interested in buying a merch calendar, I'll have that info in the description. And definitely leave me a comment if you'd like to be entered into the Halloween giveaway. Alright guys,